We're going to talk about Webpack. Now, I initially, called this the core concepts, and then I found out it was a 45-minute talk. I was like, there's a couple more things that we can talk about. So yes, I'm Sean Larkinn. I'm a program manager for Microsoft at the web platform, and my team, or what I specialize in, is Edge Dev Tools. But I'm also a maintainer and developer advocate and evangelist for the Webpack open source project, and also have done considerable amount of work in the Angular CLI and just trying to evangelize open source sustainability in general. So I know that there's some people in Nebraska here, so where are you guys? Where are they? Where's my team? So the place that I worked at just before here is in Nebraska, called Mutual of Omaha. Where's the Mutual of Omaha people? Maybe? Oh, there they are. What's up? Yeah. So they're awesome. Yeah, so this is actually where Nebraska is. So just in case you didn't know, you're from the coasts. So a little bit about myself. I'm a former tech support rep, kind of gone rogue. I got tired of not being able to solve people's problems. And so I learned how to program. I started with, I think, AppleScript, and then Objective-C and Ruby. And now it's JavaScript. I also love woodworking, and then that's supposed to be chicken farming, but that emoji never shows up. Hey, it's Nebraska, come on. Yeah, and so also just building open source best practices, communities, and helping other open source projects, and getting people to contribute for the first time. So you can find me at all these things at the Larkinn, at the Larkinn, play on words. And if you want to, I'll give you a moment on Twitter if you want to tweet this out. By all means, take your time. I should get the Hack the Planet meme with Webpack the Planet. So if you guys don't find time to talk to me, or you want to ask me a question, by all means, you can go to my GitHub. But let's talk about JavaScript modules. So, I guess a good way to start off is, who here uses Webpack? Yeah? Okay, that's great. How many here use gulp or grunt? There's nothing wrong with it. Awesome, cool, no shame. And how about like a makefile? Is that, or I guess composer scripts, right? Okay. So, but we're going to talk about Webpack and JavaScript modules. So, who here knows what a JavaScript module is? Okay, less hands. So, but we understand the benefits of a module. So they're reusable, they're encapsulated, and they help keep your code organized. And they're pieces of functionality that are convenient that you can require into your code base. But what do they look like? So there's CommonJS, which came from Node. And then we also have AMD. But there's also AMD plus CommonJS. And there's now the ECMAScript and TypeScript if you're in the Angular community. Module syntax, which is using imports and is based on the Harmony spec. So how do they work in the browser? Yeah, you guys all know. That's the thing. None of them work in the browser, except for ECMAScript modules in Safari. And so we know that that's not sustainable. And if you've just encountered JavaScript, you know that every library is different. They all ship their own different module types, and it's up to them to choose. And we're just talking about JavaScript. We're not talking about images and other assets, CSS, preprocessors, whatnot. And so they all have their own ways to package things as well. So wouldn't it be nice if there was just something that was able to handle all of these module formats and asset types? So let's talk about Webpack. Yeah. So Webpack, in its simplest explanation, is a module bundler. But it's what does that mean, Sean? A module bundler lets you write modules, but then it compiles them down to work in the browser. It's as simple as that. And there's a couple different ways that you can use Webpack. So this is an example of the Webpack configuration. You'd be like, Sean, wait, that's a module. And it's right. the configuration is code. Or you can use our Webpack CLI. And almost every single CLI flag actually maps to a configuration property. And then we also have a Node API. So if you're running your own Node server, which is probably not likely here, but you can still do so. So, how many here, so let's just raise the hands again. How many here use Webpack? Yeah, go ahead. There's a lot of hands. How many here understand how it works? It's okay if you don't. And maybe you don't want to. But the point of this talk is to give you guys the information to understand how it works at a high level so you can walk into any configuration or any Laravel mix setup and be able to customize it and be comfortable making changes so that it works for your workflow. So the first core concept is what we call entry. So let's take an example of an application that, we have this bootstrap file. It's a single JavaScript file, but it's going to import specific components. And let's just say that component probably imports some other files, some other modules. But that one also imports, a couple assets. Like, what? So this top file is actually called our entry file. So this is what the concept entry is. It's a starting point that Webpack uses to trace through each of these files looking for dependency statements. Anybody like, dependency statement? So an example would be, in your configuration, you use the entry property and you specify a relative path to that file. Well, what Webpack is doing is it starts there, it parses it, and then looks for dependency statements, and then the files that they reference. And then it continues and creates a graph until it's traced all the way throughout the application. And that's all the entry's purpose is. So when you think about it, the entry point, it tells Webpack what to load for the browser. And it complements another core concept called the output property. So output. We could take that same example, and from there, we need to tell Webpack what to do once it's created a dependency graph. So you can see this is just an example of an output property. It's a JavaScript object that takes a path and a file name. And so that's the name of your bundle and where it's going to be saved. And so really simply, output tells Webpack where and how to distribute those bundles, and it works with the entry point. Now, mind you, there's more properties in output than just what you've seen there, but the point is to get you to conceptualize that output is specifically dealing with how your bundles are going to be created and what format they're in. And so this is one of my favorites. This is loaders and rules. So loaders take this idea that, so Webpack only understands JavaScript. And so if you look here in this example, the purpose of a loader is to tell Webpack, before it adds a file to its dependency graph, how to transform it and add it to that graph. So you can think of loaders as functional transforms. It takes a source and then returns a new source. So in this case, there's two basic properties that you want to define when you use loaders and rules. So each of these objects here in this array is a rule set. And all we're saying to Webpack is, hey, when you come across a .js file or a file that ends with that extension, assign this functional transform to it on a per file basis before you've added it to the dependency graph. And so with that kind of same tree I showed you or graph earlier, this might be what it looks like. The beauty is that since Webpack treats everything like a module, it can leverage and allow you to do things like importing CSS into JavaScript, or importing assets, or having a CSS file declare an image as a dependency in its background URL. And there's more options that you can use to filter and test and use for linting. Or a good example here is that who writes their tests next to your actual, let's say, a controller or something like that. Is that common? Maybe? OK, yeah, I do it too. So a good example with Webpack is you don't want to actually include your tests for production environments. So you can use the includes and excludes properties to ignore certain types of transforms. And then one of the most powerful features about Webpack is that loaders are meant to be a single purpose. So you may have you ever seen this kind of example before where you're chaining multiple loaders together? Maybe. Or maybe it's mix dot, 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 and applying these different transforms. So this is an example of how you would chain loaders with Webpack. And if you look at this conveyor belt here, it operates from right to left, just like a function nested in itself goes inside to out. And so we have style.less. And then it transforms it into style.css through the CSS loader, into an array in memory that's JavaScript. And then that converts it to a JavaScript module that just says, hey, take this string of styles and slap it on a script tag in the browser. And this is just one example. There's many ways to load CSS, but the point is showing you that loaders have single purpose, and you can chain them together to really encourage composition. And on top of that, the most beautiful thing is that a loader is really easy to create. It's just a module that exports a function that takes a source and returns a new source. And so we've had this explosion of all of these different loaders that allow you to do whatever you want with your project, whether it be using Haml or even Twig on the JavaScript side for templating. You can use Sass and Less and PostCSS. There's all these different types of transforms that are available, and because of our community, we have all these loaders, including a Babel transform that lets you write PHP that compiles down to JavaScript. Take that one in for a second. Yeah, and it works. It works pretty crazily, too. Just an idea. So yeah. We know about entry. We understand output. Loaders, they tell Webpack how to transform and interpret and translate files on a per file basis before adding it to your dependency graph. And so this is my favorite one, and we may even veer off a little bit once we start on this. So plugins, the first thing I want to do is talk about the anatomy, because once you understand the anatomy, it's easier to know how to use them and create your own. So plugins are just an instance or an object or even a class. I call them classes. And they have an apply method on their prototype chain. But their purpose is that they allow you to plug into different lifecycle events in Webpack and then just perform whatever custom functionality you want. So in this example that we have here, we know that this is a ES5 class, and it's exported. It's just a JavaScript module. And so what's happening here is that this apply method, the Webpack compiler is passed through to this function and gives the plugin author the ability to call plugin. And so that's how you register to specific events. And then, in this case, we're dinging a bell on the terminal if Webpack fails. And so now that you kind of understand it's a class, or it's an instance, so to use it in your configuration, you just have a plugins array in which you pass a new instance to it. And so if you wanted to pass additional options, you use that instance's constructor. And on top of that, there's a huge amount of plugins that are built out of the box. And why is that? That's because 80% of Webpack's own source code is made up of this entire system. Webpack itself is 80% of plugins. Yeah. Yeah. That was my response when I found it out. So this is powered by a system called Tappable. So what Tappable is a little 230-line library in Webpack, or in a separate repo, that mixes into classes so that they can be plugged into. And it's the backbone of the Webpack plugin system. So here's another example of now the instance emitting those events. So we have, what happens is when you mix this class in, they call functions that are provided from being mixed in or extended, like apply plugins or apply plugins parallel. You can do them in a variety of ways, but these are the hooks that plugins can plug into. And here's, again, another example of this is some module that is a class, and all it's doing is taking the compiler that's passed in and hooking into that event. And so I'll skip through some of the drawn code. A tappable instance is just a class that extends that class. So we have 7 really important ones in Webpack, and you always plug into the compiler to receive other additional ones, like a compilation, which is your dependency graph. And so you might say, like, Sean, why are you going this deep? And the reason is because once you understand from a high level how it works, you can walk away and do anything you want with it, or nothing. You may just want to write some PHP. And that's OK. So I'm going to just talk about the 7 tappable instances really quickly, and just talk about what their purposes are. So the compiler, it is the top level API. Who here has ever written any compiler stuff? Maybe? Yeah? Nice. OK. Doesn't matter what language. Back in CS 101. So it is responsible for things like starting and stopping, emitting errors, telling plugins when Webpack is finished. Then there's the compilation, which is called the dependency graph. So this is where the entire dependency graph traversal algorithm is. So all of that code happens right here. It's kind of like the brain or the central processor. And then we have something called the resolver. I don't even know why I called it the bloodhound. That's so weird. But the purpose of a resolver is to take a path, like a relative path that you might write, and then find out if that file exists. It resolves it. And then it provides some more information. And yes, all of these instances are pluggable. So this is enhanced resolve, which is what our resolver is. And these are the plugins that are applied to it. Then we have this thing called a module factory. Now, in PHP code, I know that factories are pretty common, right? I hear people, they're like, factories. I'm like, OK. So this will probably make sense. All this does is it takes that resolved request, it gathers the source, and then creates a new object out of it so that we can use it and call functions and functionality for it. So, you pass this information from the resolver, and that takes that module source. And now we have this beautiful object that we can do things to, extend and mutate and change. So pretty. And then we have the parser. So has anybody ever written a parser before or worked with a parser? OK, same compiler people over there. So a parser parses a file. So if you don't know what that means, it takes a module source or a source string, and it creates this tree out of it. And it's a syntax that allows you to see exactly what the language is in a tree format instead of a string. And so what happens here is that Webpack will then take any require or import statement or anything like that and create a dependency out of it. So it's like reading the module source, looking for those require statements, and then it adds dependency objects to it. And then template. I mean, you guys all use Blade templates and Twig templates, right? Yeah? What's the purpose of a template? It's to bind data to some sort of representation. And so the template in Webpack binds data for your modules and then creates that code based on what the template is. So there's that same module and all the dependencies that we have. And we're going to have a template for every type of object that we have here. It kind of looks like Twig bindings. And it actually generates the source code. So don't let this confuse you too much. This is really just the takeaway is kind of having a high-level understanding. So at the top, with the compiler, you get an entry point. it's going to send it to the resolver, and it's going to return the full information if it exists. And then what Webpack is going to do is it's going to create a normal module out of it, and it's going to try to parse it. If it's not a JavaScript file, it's going to run it through loaders until it is. Now that it can parse it, it has dependencies. And then those dependencies, we have to verify that they exist in their paths. So then the whole process repeats itself recursively. And so here's a friendly little comic on how this works. Hey, I'm a module. I can't wait to work in the browser. Whoa, cool your jets. We need to get you into shape before you can be on the big stage. So the parser gave us some special instructions for rendering these dependencies called templates through the factory. I'm finally rendered. Browser land, here I come. So you just understood how Webpack works entirely under the hood, and that's it. That's it. That is it. And of course, you might have questions, but find me afterwards. It's okay. And that's the whole plugin architecture right there. Everything that you saw can be plugged into and customized if you want to take it that far. So, plugins, they allow additional functionality to compilations, the compiler, and give you access to the lifecycle of Webpack. It does everything else you ever would want to. So I like to do like a little mini self Q&A, like, Sean, why use Webpack when I have Grunt and Gulp? Well, I think now you guys might have a better understanding. It's because Gulp and Grunt are just task runners. All they know how to do is smush files together. And so if you import all of Lodash or, I don't know, another like functional utility library or something like that, and you only use one function, you're still going to get the whole library on top of it. What's better, Webpack or System.js? This is more common in the JavaScript community. But, you know, they're two different things. One is a module bundler, and one is a dynamic loader. It lives in the runtime. But Sean, HTTP 2 will fix everything. I don't need this craziness. Nuance. Usually I say false. But actually, HTTP 2 makes Webpack even more powerful because you can ship 50 smaller bundles or 30 smaller bundles for your application and have that same multi-threaded or streaming downloading of assets. So originally, I was sitting at Mutual of Omaha before I started looking into Webpack or joining the core team, and I was like, what should I use? And so this was one of the major deciders for me. It was the ability to be flexible and work with a variety of different workflows, have the ability to support different modules, because you're going to come across a whole bunch of different ones in the JavaScript community. And we're just scratching the surface. There's all sorts of other incredible features that you can leverage that we haven't even talked about. And so I like to do a little looking into the future. What's going on for Webpack now? So we created this plugin called Aggressive Splitting Plugin, although it's kind of violent. But it's in latest Webpack now, so if you want to be able to split by file size to support H2, you can. Or have other H2 features like a dependency push-driven manifest. Or completely overhaul our configuration so it's easier for folks like you all to use. Scope hoisting and module inlining. This is a feature we just added in Webpack 3. And we're working with, I guess now, almost ironic, working with lots of different browser teams, including Microsoft, who uses Webpack heavily internally, to have different custom instrumentation so you guys have a killer experience. And then other wild ideas why don't you use headless Chrome and machine learning, and we could automatically tweak a configuration or how we split our code. Or maybe even a specification for the web that says how should, that's driven by a bundler. And then also things like accessibility. Who works for an insurance company or has to worry about accessibility here? Or you get sued, right? Okay. So this is really important. We want to make it easier to use. Or do like really crazy things, like maybe Laravel Horizon to set off jobs, and maybe use a dependency cache in Redis, and have really wild, insane ideas. That was more for you guys to experiment with. Planting the seed. But wait, there's more. There's more. So who's already using Webpack? I know you guys are, but what projects and so who here? Well, we'll get to that. So there's the Angular CLI. We have for React users, there's Create React App. These are all ways to abstract kind of worrying about the build, because it's not for everybody, to need to have to configure or want to. There's the Vue CLI, or Mix, and Laravel. Remember when this came out, I almost fell out of my chair. Seriously. But then who's a WordPress or a Symfony developer or who have used it before? These are now going to be shipping with Webpack out of the box. Rails, Ruby. I came from the Ruby community, so Ruby on Rails is now using it. Grails and JHipster Java-based projects have drop-in replacements. And even if you're into ASP.NET and stuff like that, JavaScript Core Services is another package that ships with Webpack. And I always say, why? Why stop talking about this, Sean? Why? Why is this so important? It's because Webpack enables performance. It doesn't have to be hard. But when you think about it like this, when you understand how to optimize your application, you can have a really huge impact on the bottom line for your company. I think it's 53% of sites are abandoned if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. 3 seconds. And 77% of mobile sites right now take longer than 10 seconds to load on a 3G network. And the average is 19. So there's obvious room for improvement. And there's even people out there saying now Webpack is people using Webpack are creating progressive web apps and applications that are high performance and setting the canonical standard. Okay, Sean, you might convince me. Where can I learn more? So here's a self-plug. I just released something called Webpack Academy. If you wanted to learn more of the core concepts. When I left Mutual of Omaha, I felt guilty because I really kind of went overboard with the Webpack configuration. And so I promised that I would give them a resource that they could always have access for free for them anytime. And so, but I also made a bunch of courses everything there is free. So take a look at webpack.academy if you care, if you want to learn more. But there's also Awesome Webpack, which is in our Contrib organization. This has a list of community documents curated for anybody to have access to. We have our new documentation page, which is like a Webpack 2 exclusive. Go to webpack.js.org/concepts. And I wrote this mirroring the talk here that I've done before. And so, we wanted to provide something that's easy for people to use. And if you want to help us, we believe that contributing should be the most enjoyable experience ever. Who here has never contributed to open source? And it's okay. I want to know. Come find me afterwards. There's never a wrong way to get started. It should be something that you love to do. And as you can see from that list here, there's 1,000 different ways that you can do it that that go beyond contributions, commits, and PRs. Like triaging issues, helping out our core loaders and plugins that we have. Even in Webpack and Trib, we have task boards for individual people or the community that have high priority or our default standards. And then you can even help with our documentation. Or just use Webpack 3 and report bugs. Or use Laravel Mix. I think, Jeff, I put in a PR for 3.4, so let me know if that gets landed. Oh, nice. Nice, OK. And then, all of the time that our core team spends is on our free time. For the exception of our companies being able to support us 20 or 10% time. So, otherwise, we do this in our spare time, and we would love to be able to have any contributor be able to benefit and have the same kind of support that we have. But not everybody works at a company like that. And so we have an open collective, which is a transparent donation platform that lets people sponsor or become a backer for our project. And so, if you want to help shape the future but don't want to do it through contributions, you can do so through our open collective. And, in the end, the things that I love about Laravel and Vue and the decision for them to use Webpack is that all of these projects are grassroots, community-driven projects with no business incentives. We literally built this project for you. And so we give a shit. Sorry, earmuffs, kids. So, at any time, you can tweet at me at the Larkinn about this talk or feedback or whatever, it doesn't matter. Or hashtag Webpack. If you tweet hashtag Webpack, I will see the tweet, and I will respond to it. So anything. We like candid feedback. But otherwise, in the end, as long as, if you don't want to walk away using Webpack, at least you now understand how to debug and have an escape hatch. So that's it. Thank you.